Welcome back to another video. Today we are looking at the Fujifilm XF 50mm f1.0 lens. Now this is an exciting lens because of course f1.0 and autofocus are not something you see every day when it comes to a lens. Now I'm actually shooting on this lens right now. I thought that'd be helpful. That means everything you see in this video, every single shot apart from the shots of the lens itself, was shot with this lens. And that means everything is sample footage. So you've got sample footage, video of me speaking. Of course, we've got loads of photos as well. I've primarily been doing portraiture, a little bit of product photography as well, because I think that's probably the kinds of stuff people are going to use this lens for, as well as things like wedding and events and stuff like that. But we'll get onto that in a little bit. We're going to talk about image quality, autofocus, of course, whether it can keep up with eye autofocus and that kind of thing, how it feels to shoot with, and what you might use this lens for, because it is a little bit niche at f1.0, but we're going to get onto all of that. So let's start off with image quality. Now, first of all, I set up a little test shot of me talking just a minute ago to make sure that f1 didn't look crazy. I'm shooting at f1 now, but the main thing that popped out to me is just how sharp it is. Even wide open at f1.0, it's super sharp, the image, which I think looks great. I think it looks really, really good. And I was surprised by, how sharp it was wide open. It means it's totally usable. Whether you want to do weddings or events, you want to use that nice, huge aperture to let more light in, you can rest assured that you're still going to be able to get nice, sharp, usable images using f1. Now, because this is an APS-C system, it's actually more like a 76mm equivalent for full frame, which is kind of perfect, I think, for a portrait kind of lens, that kind of feel to it. I think a lot of people are going to be wanting to use this for portrait, so I've certainly done a good amount of portrait shooting with this. Happy to say, first of all, I think it looks great, image quality wise, colors are fantastic, but you'd probably expect that from a Fujifilm. The bokeh, is fantastic. Now, you'd probably expect that. f1.0, you'd probably expect to have some nice looking bokeh. It gives you a similar sort of feel for a full frame camera as something about f1.4. I think technically it might be f1.5, but it's around that. That's how it feels, about that kind of depth of field. But it looks fantastic. As you'll know, if you've used different lenses render bokeh differently. And on this one, it's very smooth. It's very, very nice and smooth. You don't get kind of artifacting. You don't get that weird sort of waviness to it. It just looks really, really good. Now, if you care about this kind of stuff, it's 12 elements in 9 different groups. We've got 2 ED elements and 1 spherical element. That means it's going to reduce things like ghosting, flaring, stuff like that. I never had any issues with that anyway, but that's probably why. And actually it helps with the image quality. And if that's what's making this look so nice, I'm all for it. Now, I mentioned that I was shooting portraiture, shooting at f1.0 wide open. I also shot at some other apertures as well, just to kind of vary it up a little bit. But something I was keen to try out was the eye autofocus. How reactive was this lens going to be? How capable is it of keeping up with the eye autofocus? And I'm really happy to say I didn't have a single issue with this at all, not a single one. The autofocus seems to keep up really fast. The lens is obviously set up with this in mind. I would imagine it would be anyway, because it's clearly, going to be aimed at portraiture and that kind of thing. But it's great to know you can rely on that autofocus. So whether you're doing weddings, events, something like that, where, eye autofocus is going to be key for you to be able to get the shots off quickly, you're absolutely going to be able to rely on that here with this lens, which is great. It's a huge thing. It's a massive tick for this lens. It also makes this a great lens for things like events and weddings and stuff like that, because you're going to be able to let so much more light in at f1, so you don't have to bump up the ISO quite as much. Now, that's not always a massive problem anyway. Things like the X-T4 are really good with slightly higher ISO values, but they're not generally as good as maybe a full frame camera. And that means that using f1 is a great way to keep the ISO down a little bit, reduce the noise, get nice clean pictures, but you're still gonna get the nice sharp images that we mentioned earlier with the image quality, and you can rely on that autofocus. So it's a great setup for someone who wants to do that kind of thing. Now, the lens itself it's not small. It was never gonna be small, and a 50mm f1.0 is never gonna be a small lens, but it's not actually ridiculously big or ridiculously heavy at all. It sits really quite well on the front of an X-T4, so I'll show you a bunch of images of that now. It actually feels good. It's certainly not heavy to hold. You can shoot with this one-handed if you wanted to, or you can certainly carry it around one-handed for extended periods of time. That's not going to be an issue. You're not going to find your hand cramping up or arms hurting or anything like that. So again, weddings, events, that kind of stuff, this is totally usable as a camera that you can carry around. Now the lens feels good. It's a nice premium build, you know, good quality. It feels good in the hands. It's got a nice aperture ring on it as well with a clicker, which I always appreciate. There's no option to declick it for videographers. I don't personally find that to be an issue. I never actually really change aperture in the middle of shooting. So not really a massive thing, I don't think. And you know, to be honest, if you are going to change it, you know, you can get away with it. It's not a problem at all, but it feels good for a photographer. It feels really, really nice. I think it's a nice touch. The manual focus ring similarly feels good. It's a good bit of weight to it as well. It pairs very nicely on the front of the X-T4, which I'm using, but it would go nicely on the X-T3 as well. It's just a good size and weight for that kind of camera. Makes it feel okay in the hands, means you could carry it around, you know, for an extended period of time. If you were doing something like events or wedding, this would be perfect for just carrying around. You certainly wouldn't be in pain or struggling with it, you know, after carrying it for a couple of hours. Now, all that said, I think this lens is relatively niche with what it's going to serve. I think that it could be perfect for a lot of people. You know, the low light capabilities of it are superb, just really, really fantastic. That's going to let more light in. It means for events, for weddings, for stuff like that, you've got bad lighting, you're not going to struggle as much. You're not going to have to bump up the ISO, which means you can get cleaner images. It's nice and sharp. You know, for portraiture, I think it works really well. I did a bit of product photography as well, and actually it is really nice because it lets so much light in. That said, I probably, for product photography, it's rare that I would shoot as fast as f1. You know, I don't really ever have a need to do that unless you very specifically want a very shallow depth of field for product photography. I probably wouldn't shoot at something like f1. Similarly with portrait, I just think it might be a little bit too wide open to get the features. I think it makes a very nice kind of arty lens, an arty image. And like I say, I think the primary thing I would use it for is the low light capabilities. But for me, I would stop down a little bit for most things. I just don't have a need to shoot that wide open. That said, I am not the be all and end all of photographers, and there's lots of people who may well want to use a very shallow depth of field like this, may well get a lot of use out of that low light capability. I think it's perfect for someone like that. I know I've mentioned that a few times now, but I think that is just such a good thing that this lens can be used for. So while it probably is a little bit niche for a lot of people, there are definitely going to be people out there that this is going to be a huge thing for, a really big deal, and it's going to work really well for their particular kind of workflow. Now, if you have any questions about the lens, I've been using it for a few days, so absolutely pop your questions down in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them as thoroughly as I can. Make sure to like and subscribe, assuming that you did enjoy the video. Assuming you've made it this far, I'm guessing you enjoyed it. Therefore, like and subscribe would be amazing. I'll take it as a personal favor from you to me. I will, of course, see you in the next video. And as always, thanks for watching.